I turn us now to Carmen Bambach, a revered colleague here, the great curator of Italian drawings, great connoisseur. She's always got so much on her plate that I'm happy she could be here at all. She works on the most high-minded stuff you can imagine, juggling Leonardo and Michelangelo. I simply don't know how she does it, and I'm glad she's here for us today.
May I have the lights down, please? This research is part of a book I'm writing entitled The Quest for Authenticity in Michelangelo's Drawings. I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the National Gallery of Art, CASVA, for supporting me as Andrew Mellon Professor to do research for this book. Thank you, Katia Walgaris-Brandt. Thank you, Jim Draper, for the invitation. The 16th century biographical sources suggest a rich and complex portrait of Michelangelo as a draftsman, and especially the episodes of Michelangelo's early life have provided the grounds for modern debates about the authenticity and attributions of his drawings and paintings. In this paper, I shall leave aside the fascinating problems of the early historiography in order to examine more closely the larger question regarding Michelangelo's early drawings, which emerges. How can the extant fragmentary visual evidence be reconciled with the early, half-mythical biographical tidbits? The number of surviving attributed drawings by the young Michelangelo from before 1500 is extremely small and probably amounts to just about 6 sheets, in my opinion, once one rigorously reconsiders the problems of his chronology. Given the fragility of paper, a good number of Michelangelo's more functional drawings must have perished in the course of his own working procedures, while also many of his more fragile sheets probably did not escape the accidental destruction by time and their elements over the course of nearly 500 years. Yet, beside what may be considered such relatively normal vicissitudes in the survival of Renaissance drawings, it is clear that in the case of Michelangelo, one is also dealing with a heavily revised body of work by the artist himself. A celebrated passage in the 1568 edition of Giorgio Vasari's Vita of Michelangelo states that Michelangelo destroyed numerous sketches, drawings, and cartoons shortly before his death. And the biographer also repeatedly referred to Michelangelo's gelosia delle figure, his jealously controlled access to his figural inventions and drawings. Much written evidence independently confirms Vasari's statements, including Michelangelo's own letters. Acts of Michelangelo's own willful destruction of drawings are recorded as early as 1518, when he ordered his drawings left behind in his Roman household to be burned. A plaster wall is a more durable drawing surface than paper. Curiously, the 1550 edition of Giorgio Vasari's Vita of Michelangelo alludes to the fact that the self-motivated Michelangelo as a young boy, even before his apprenticeship in the workshop of Domenico Ghirlandaio, exercised his hand by frequently drawing, and I quote, papers and walls. All 16th century sources, including Vasari's 1568 Vita of Michelangelo, however, suppressed this particular passage about drawing on papers and walls. But the tidbit in Vasari's 1550 biography about Michelangelo's youthful wall drawings was revived in the commentaries by Anton Francesco Gori to his 1746 edition of Ascanio Condivi's Vita di Michelangelo, and by Giovanni Bottari to his 1759-60 edition of Vasari's Vitae, a work with which Vasari's 1550 passage could be associated is a mural drawing fragment still extant, although I would date it to 1501-1504, and which was detached from its original location on the wall in Michelangelo's ancestral villa at Settignano, still standing today, although heavily remodeled. The Villa Michelangelo at Settignano was owned by the Buonarroti Simoni family probably since the late Trecento. Exhibited in Katia Walgaris Brandt's show Giovinezza di Michelangelo, this mural drawing fragment is the subject of my detailed article in the forthcoming Festschrift for Joseph Connors. Stylistically, I would relate the Settignano mural drawing fragment closely to Michelangelo's British Museum sheet in pen and ink on paper seen here, which I date to 1501-1504. The hatching with curved strokes in the Settignano mural drawing fragment is certainly autograph and is datable to this moment in 1501-1504 based on further comparisons to Michelangelo's drawings on paper. The body type and the type of the man's head are both closely comparable to the sheets in the Ashmolean Museum of 1501-1504. No less importantly, the mural drawing fragment at Settignano was also copied before 1595-1596 in a crude drawing by Andrea Comodi, a young artist who befriended Leonardo Buonarroti, Michelangelo's nephew, in his old age. In conjunction with the stylistic evidence, Comodi's copy makes the attribution of the original to Michelangelo rather incontrovertible. To turn to a discussion of drawings on paper, by the mid-1480s, the medium of silver point drawing on paper prepared with color was practiced with consummate skill by Domenico Ghirlandaio, an artist who were trained in the Ghirlandaio workshop. It was also practiced by many of Michelangelo's contemporaries, such as Leonardo, Filippino Lippi, Francesco Granacci, and Raphael. But no drawings by Michelangelo exist in this traditional 15th century technique, and it is highly improbable that Michelangelo produced none. This absence of metal point drawings on colored paper from Michelangelo's corpus may not be simply accidental, given the revisionist accounts of his artistic education promulgated by his biographers and the acts of destruction by the artist himself. Condivi's famous but mangled anecdote describes that the young Michelangelo recreated the fantastic creatures from Martin Schongauer's engraving The Tribulations of St. Anthony in a picture. To accomplish this and improve upon it, as we know, the young Michelangelo studied from nature and especially the specimens from the fish market. This well-known story was also adopted in Benedetto Varchi's Orazione Funerale of 1564 and in Vasari's 1568 Vita. One can deduce from empirical observation of Schongauer's engraving that the German master's highly descriptive uses of line, the richly inked qualities of his tone, and the disciplined variety of his stippling and hatching techniques must have captivated the eye of Michelangelo and other Italian artists as much as his highly original imagery. A detail from Schongauer's engraving shows his intricate yet highly disciplined manner of hatching, particularly in the draperies. It serves as a reminder of his profound and lasting influence for Michelangelo's later techniques of hatching. The detail now on the screen shows the cross-hatching techniques with pen and ink in a drapery study on Michelangelo's Detroit sheet of about 1505-1508. The majority of Michelangelo's figure studies before the time of the Battle of Cascina cartoon, commissioned in late summer 1504, are in pen and ink with firm expressive contours and dynamic effects of hatching and cross-hatching that descriptively follow the form. It will be remembered here that Michelangelo's uses of hatching and cross-hatching in his pen drawings and in the underdrawings of his paintings have been particularly cited by recent scholars, reasonably and unreasonably so, in making attributions. Italian late Gothic draftsmen had employed expressive techniques of parallel and cross-hatching in drawings on paper in the 1430s, but it was the attentive study of northern prints in the late Quattrocento which led Ghirlandaio to his reinvention of carefully descriptive cross-hatching techniques in pen and ink drawing. The drawings by artists of the Ghirlandaio bottega, including those by the young Michelangelo, demonstrate the practice and dissemination of their master's approach, as not a few art historians have recognized. Both editions of Vasari's biography of Michelangelo open with an invocation of the, and I quote, the light of the most famous Giotto, col lume del famosissimo Giotto, and the 1568 Vita generally celebrated Michelangelo's close study and imitation of drawings by the great masters in his early years. This praise of his technical virtuosity, his Virtù, is intertwined with the topos of imitatio, modeled upon the example of antiquity, for the subtext in Vasari's narrative is a comparison of Michelangelo with ancients and moderns, gli antichi e moderni, in which he surpasses both. Scholars agree with relative consensus that Michelangelo's earliest drawings are his copies in pen and ink after the great Florentine masters Giotto and Masaccio. But attentive stylistic analysis suggests that Michelangelo's self-consciously beautiful copy after Giotto's ascension of Saint John the Evangelist fresco in the Peruzzi Chapel of Santa Croce and his copies inspired by Masaccio's frescoes in the Brancacci Chapel and the Lost Sagra at Santa Maria del Carmine already seem relatively mature works in their own right. The presence of the studies of arms in red chalk on these double-sided sheets on the verso of the Louvre drawing seen at right here, and on the recto in the Munich drawing links them stylistically together. And since the Munich copy after Masaccio's St. Peter lies over earlier layers of drawing in red chalk, one can be fairly certain that the dating of these sheets is later rather than earlier. According to the chronology proposed here, Michelangelo's development in his pen and ink drawings of the 1490s was toward a gradually more sculptural definition of the modeling with hatching, but which until the very last years of the century he usually accomplished with extremely disciplined straight strokes, whether he parallel hatched or cross hatched, to build up relief-like tone in forms and background. Michelangelo's technique of hatching with orderly, almost pitch-straight strokes was a holdover from his study of both 15th century engravings and the pen and ink drawings by Domenico Ghirlandaio, as is particularly evident in the pen and ink preparatory sketches and studies for the frescoes of 1486-1490 at Santa Maria Novella. Ghirlandaio used at this time a bold, uniformly diagonal manner of parallel hatching. His straight, diagonal parallel strokes course across all forms, whether they are planar, rounded, projecting, or receding. Ghirlandaio's costume study for a female portrait in the birth of St. John the Baptist, seen here at left, though relatively sketchy, exhibits a type of unified diagonal parallel hatching which does not change directions in defining the bodice, skirt, folds, and sleeves. At right, in Ghirlandaio's densely modeled study for the woman attendant of fluttering draperies in the birth of the Virgin, the very regular patches of parallel hatching and cross-hatching are extremely precise and done with very straight strokes. Similarly, uniform parallel hatching with straight strokes is seen in Ghirlandaio's rough composition sketch for the birth of the Virgin, and in his more developed, brilliantly expressive composition sketch for the naming of St. John the Baptist fresco. One may also productively compare a detail from the young Michelangelo's sheet of figural studies at the Tyler Museum to a detail from Ghirlandaio's naming of Saint John the Baptist in the British Museum. Striking similarities can be observed in the shorthand of the facial features, especially in the almost caricature-like profiles of the gaping man and woman, and in the self-confident economy of modeling with parallel hatching. If the kinships in two such details were to carry any meaning, it is that Michelangelo studied Ghirlandaio's drawing style and tricks of figural notation with remarkable absorption. At any event, Michelangelo's pen and ink drawings display a dazzling technical bravura of the pen and parallel hatching and cross-hatching that cannot pass as a student's first exercises. Based on an analysis of hatching techniques and the internal comparisons which link drawings with one another, it must be emphasized that the chronology of Michelangelo's extant drawings actually begins somewhere between 1490 and 1495, when Michelangelo was between 15 and 20 years old. The 6 or so sheets by Michelangelo which were produced in the 1490s include the copy after Giotto at the Louvre, followed by the very damaged Munich sheet containing on the recto the copy after Masaccia's St. Peter in the tribute money, the sketchy double-sided Tyler Museum sheet, the more majestic double-sided sheet at the Albertina, the so-called philosopher or magus at the British Museum, and the very damaged Louvre composition of Saint Jerome in prayer. As a group, the most worked up of these drawings of the 1490s are distinguished by the great regularity of their diagonal parallel hatching and cross-hatching, done with rather straight lines and built up densely to create depths of shadow. Michelangelo also usually thickened the cross-hatching by adding further cross-strokes at an angle. The best preserved example of the group is the British Museum drawing, which you see here on the screen. As Johannes Wilde first noticed, a distinguishing characteristic in many of these autograph early pen and ink drawings by Michelangelo is his combined use of two hues of ink, a golden brown and a grayish brown ink, which are worked up together so integrally as part of the design as to indicate that the two hues were used concurrently at the moment of design rather than constituting a revision separated by a long period of time. There seem to be only very rare exceptions to this in drawings of 1501 to 1505. In the case of the early British Museum sheet of 1495-1500, technical analysis has shown that the two inks used of golden brown and ash gray brown hues are iron gall inks, as in infrared light, none of these ink design layers disappears. Something similar is also true of the inks of ash gray brown and golden brown hues in the later sheet at Detroit, for in ultraviolet light, both types of brown ink fluoresce in much the same way, indicating that despite their different colors, they are both iron gall inks, but probably done from different recipes. The stylistically earliest of these copies is a Louvre sheet depicting two male onlookers at left foreground in Giotto's Ascension of St. John the Evangelist, the scene frescoed on the lowest register of the right wall in the Peruzzi Chapel at Santa Croce, within the convenient reach of the eye of the beholder. Here, the hatching is drawn with more delicate, short, and carefully modulated straight strokes of parallel and cross-hatching than in the Munich sheet depicting St. Peter. In the Louvre copy after Giotto, the small patches of cross-hatch shadow neatly adapt to the planes of the forms while maintaining an overall unified order across a modeled surface, although the contours around the figures seem in part somewhat tentative. In copying Giotto's figures, Michelangelo emphasized their sculptural presence, rendering them more monumental than in the original. And it is possible, in my view, that in the case of the leftmost figure, the young artist actually posed a life model from which to study more closely the effects of the hand clutching the tunic and the falling drapery folds in order to improve upon the original with greater naturalism. Michelangelo's summary drawing style in the copy after St. Peter from Masaccio's tribute money is much bolder in the outlines and inner modeling, and is much more pared down in strokes. The verso of the Munich sheet, seen here at right, only came to light in 1977 and portrays a highly finished fragment of the upper part of a male torso, tentatively connected by Richard Haprad as a preliminary study for Michelangelo's Lost Hercules in the marble sculpture. It seems much more probable that this is a copy by Michelangelo after a finished work. Based on Michelangelo's very careful, attentively plastic modeling with hatching in the Munich verso, I would venture a guess that this model may have been the lost sculpted flake Marsyas in the collections of Cosimo de' Medici el Vecchio and Lorenzo el Magnifico. On the Munich verso, the study of a skeleton of a hand at upper left may relate to Michelangelo's early study of anatomy from corpses at Santo Spirito, as narrated by both Condivi and Vasari, which led to his carving of the Santo Spirito crucifix in 1492-94 for the prior. And we must remember, skeletal remains are more easily available anatomical material than dissected soft tissue. The double-sided sheet with sketches and studies in the Tyler Museum, Haarlem, was particularly doubted by early critics. But as seen here, the manner of hatching, outlines, and shorthand notation for the facial features used in the sketches of the figures on the Tyler Museum recto are extremely similar to those in the securely accepted Albertina drawing. The massing of the heads and bodies are also similarly volumetric. The Tyler and Albertina sheets must be of the same date. In the justly famous double-sided sheet in the Albertina, Michelangelo presents a grouping of figures with what is his already characteristic force of expression and maturity of vision, to the extent that it is no longer possible to conclude definitively whether the designs are an original invention or whether the sheet represents inspired copies after Quattrocento models. The proposals that the figures are based on Masaccio's lost fresco of the consecration of Santa Maria del Carmine de Sagra have rightly been contested. The suggestion that the kneeling man on the verso of the Albertina sheet, that he represents a Saint Cosmas or a Saint Damian, patron saints of the Medici, has been made based on the costume of the figure, and particularly his hat. But such questions must be left open, since identifications of figures based on costume details can at times be very misleading. In the related British Museum sheet, the standing man with a Greek-style hat in the manner of that worn by the Byzantine Emperor John VIII Palaeologus has been variously identified as an alchemist, a philosopher, a magus, and a St. James. What a range! All based on the elusive attributes seen on Michelangelo's figure. I introduce here a work that has been hitherto unnoticed in the literature on Michelangelo's British Museum drawing, namely Baccio Baldini's engraving of Canto 4 from Dante's Inferno from 1484-87. Because it has been demonstrated that Baldini's series of engravings after Dante's Divine Comedy are extremely faithful to the poetic text, one knows the exact order in which the spirits appearing in limbo must be identified. From left to right, Homer holding a sword, Horace, Ovid, and Lucan. We must notice the pointed hats of Homer and Lucan, while no less interestingly, the figure which is probably Horace wears a kind of soft pillbox hat that we associate with Saints Cosmas and Damian, patron saints of the Medici. The extremely damaged nude Saint Jerome kneeling in prayer in a cave fits very well stylistically within this group, datable to 1496-99 during Michelangelo's time in Rome. The pose of Saint Jerome is based on Roman models, among them the Belvedere torso, as has often been noted. The Saint Jerome is the only relatively finished composition drawing of my group. Based on Pablo de Céspedes and Vasari in 1568, one knows that during his early Roman years, Michelangelo produced a design for a complete painting of St. Francis receiving the stigmata in a landscape which, according to Giovanni Agosti and Michael Hirst, may have been executed by Piero d'Argenta, a painting now lost but recorded in a small drawing by Padre Sebastiano Resta. The painting was placed in the first chapel at left in San Pietro in Montorio. One knows nothing of a composition by Michelangelo for a Saint Jerome, but the Louvre drawing of Saint Jerome presents such a complete main figure and background landscape that it is possible that Michelangelo produced this composition to serve as a model for another artist to carry it out as a finished work. Both editions of Vasari carefully mention Michelangelo's long, attentive study of Masaccio during his time in Lorenzo de' Medici's sculpture garden at San Marco, and this reaffirmed Michelangelo's place among the greats in Vasari's proposed history of Italian art. I quote, "He drew for many months from the paintings of Masaccio in the Carmine, where he copied those works with so much judgment that artists and all other men were astonished, but in such a manner that envy against him grew together with his fame." End of quote. Judging from their style, however, Michelangelo's copies after Masaccio seem to date from different points in his career. The Munich St. Peter from the tribute money is from 1490-92. The studies in the Albertina sheet, if after Masaccio and his lost fresco of the Sagra, seem closer to 1495-96, while the red chalk study after the expulsion seen here on the screen is without doubt from a time nearer the Battle of Cascina, 1504, in view of the study on the verso in red chalk. Close to 1500, Michelangelo loosened up his techniques of hatching with the pen greatly. He began using parallel hatching and cross-hatching with curving strokes that are often rather short. These curved strokes of parallel hatching and cross-hatching are bolder, sometimes spidery, and much more pliant than in his earlier drawings. Michelangelo's new manner of hatching sought to depict more minutely the intricacies of anatomical surface without losing sight of the overall unions of tone and highlight across the form. His freer, rounded strokes articulate form and follow the soft protrusions of flesh, muscles, tendons, and bones in especially descriptive ways, as is evident in the British Museum study of a figure with a raised arm, which is reminiscent of the Apollo Belvedere. The verso of this sheet in the British Museum has studies for walking infants, which connect to the marble Madonnas undertaken by Michelangelo between 1503 and 1505. By 1503-1504, at the cusp of the Battle of Cascina nude studies, Michelangelo's pen and ink drawing style attained an impressive forcefulness of stroke. His bold strokes of parallel and cross-hatching curve and mold expressively as they follow the details of the anatomical surfaces. His economy of stroke is also remarkable. Despite the complexities in the passages of chiaroscuro, his hatching retains its overall unity of strokes across the entire design surfaces, and the unified hatching defines the overall tectonic structure of the anatomical form. Judging from the general commentary by 16th century authors about the technical prowess required for good drawing in pen and ink, one may imagine that Michelangelo's youthful pen and ink studies were especially admired by those who had access to them. Benvenuto Cellini and Raffaele Borghini both concurred with Vasari in praising pen and ink as a difficult, difficile, even a most difficult medium, difficilissimo, to master in drawing. The reasons for this can also be intuited from Bronzino's statement recorded in Alessandro Allori's dialogue of 1565-70, De ragionamenti delle regole del disegno. Cellini, whose ties to Michelangelo ran deep, as we know, was fully conscious of the technical virtuosity required of the pen and ink medium, and I quote Cellini. This method is, however, extremely difficult, and extremely few artists have ever known how to draw well with the pen, end of quote. To Cellini, himself an extraordinary virtuoso artist of pen and ink drawings, the paragon in mind was Michelangelo. Thank you.